Imagine standing on the edge of the most glamorous red carpet in the world, where the air is thick with perfume, camera flashes cut through the night like lightning, and celebrities glide by in glittering gowns worth more than most people's houses. Now imagine walking up to that velvet rope, your head held high, only to hear the words no famous person ever wants to hear. I'm sorry, you're not on the list. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's the nightmare scenario. And according to whispers, it was Meghan Markle's reality at the Venice Film Festival premiere. What really happened that night? Why did security reportedly block her from stepping onto the red carpet? And what does this say about her standing in Hollywood, the very kingdom she once dreamed of ruling? Let's peel this back. Because this isn't just about a denied entry. It's about power, reputation, and the brutal rules of fame. And tonight, we're pulling the curtain back on a scene that shook the world of celebrity and royalty alike. But before we get to the heart of it, before we uncover what Meghan allegedly said when security stopped her, you need to understand the stage she was stepping onto. Because Venice isn't just a film festival. It's a battlefield for image, a temple of prestige. And for Meghan Markle, it represented something far more personal. The chance to prove she still belonged on the world stage. The Venice Film Festival. Established in 1932, it's the oldest film festival in the world. Picture gondolas gliding under moonlight, a city built on water, and an event dripping with old-world glamour. If Cannes is champagne and Cannes snobbery, Venice is high art with a crown of elegance. It's where auteurs launch Oscar campaigns, where fashion houses unveil their boldest designs, and where paparazzi scramble like predators to capture the perfect shot. And this year? The stakes were higher than ever. With Hollywood strikes, slowing production, and the entertainment industry at a crossroads, every red carpet appearance mattered more. Every celebrity who stepped into those blinding lights was staking their claim as relevant, powerful, untouchable. So imagine Meghan, once hailed as Hollywood royalty, turned actual royalty, striding toward that scene. The cameras should have welcomed her. The crowd should have erupted. But instead, the whispers say she faced rejection. Why does this matter now? Because Meghan has been fighting a public war for validation since stepping away from the royal family. Netflix deals, podcast launches, documentaries. She's thrown herself into the Hollywood machine, but the cracks are starting to show. Cancellations, waning influence, PR battles that never seemed to end. She wanted to reclaim the narrative. Instead, she allegedly became the narrative. And that's where the story begins. Not inside the theater, not on the red carpet, but outside, at the velvet rope. Let's rewind. Meghan wasn't new to red carpets. Long before she was the Duchess of Sussex, she was an actress grinding her way through the entertainment industry. We've seen her in gowns, smiling for photographers, playing the role of Hollywood hopeful. But those were different times. Back then, she was hungry for recognition, clawing her way up. Now, years later, she expected recognition as a given. She wasn't just another actress. She was Meghan Markle, married to a prince, global headline maker. And yet, when she approached Venice, the glamour didn't roll out for her. Security, armed with clipboards, iPads, and an unflinching rulebook, allegedly stopped her cold. Can you picture it? A duchess, hair perfect, designer dress flowing, cameras turning in her direction, only for a guard to lower his sunglasses, glance at the list, and shake his head. No entry. The irony here is staggering. Meghan, who once had an entire royal protection team ensuring doors opened for her, was now standing outside the very door she expected to waltz through. And let's talk about humiliation. There are rejections you can hide. An unreturned call, a declined invitation, a cold shoulder from a colleague. But being stopped on a red carpet, in front of the world's cameras? That's a public fall, a silent scream that echoes across tabloids and social media. But why was she even there if she wasn't invited? That's the million-dollar question. Some reports hint at confusion. Others claim she wanted to make a surprise appearance, to remind Hollywood that she's still relevant. Still others say it was a PR move gone wrong. After all, in the world of celebrity, sometimes being denied entry makes a louder headline than walking in unnoticed. What do you think? Was this desperation or strategy? Let's pause for a moment and consider what the Venice Film Festival represents in Meghan's world. For years, she's tried to pivot from royal scandal to Hollywood success. But her projects have stumbled. Her podcast was canceled. Her Netflix series underwhelmed. Her image has been battered by endless headlines painting her as difficult, calculating, or simply out of touch. Venice, then, was more than just another red carpet. It was symbolic. A chance to align herself with the best of the best, to remind the world that she wasn't just a tabloid figure. She was a player. But symbols can betray you. And on this night, the symbol of prestige turned into a symbol of rejection. And this wasn't just about her. For Meghan, every public appearance is a proxy war. Her brand is intertwined with Harry's, with the monarchy she left behind, with Hollywood's tolerance for controversy. So when she was allegedly denied entry, it wasn't just Meghan Markle standing outside that rope. It was a statement about the Sussex brand itself. Can you imagine the ripple effect? Event organizers whispering, journalists salivating, publicists frantically texting. A single moment of denial metastasizes into 1,000 rumors. Did she really try to sneak in? Was she actually invited? Did someone deliberately humiliate her? And then comes the cruelest twist of all, the crowd. Because the crowd always notices. The whispers spread fast. Phones come out. A video clip here, a photo there. Within minutes, the humiliation isn't contained to Venice, it's global. And Meghan? She allegedly didn't take it quietly. Reports claim she raised her voice, demanded recognition, insisted her name should be on that list. And that's when the cameras really turned on her. Now here's where it gets darker. For years, Meghan has been painted as someone who wants to control the narrative. But you can't control a viral moment. You can't stop a clip from spreading once it's in the wild. And this was the wildest clip yet. But the story doesn't end at the velvet rope. No. That was only the first act of a much larger drama. Because what Meghan reportedly said to the guards, the way she allegedly confronted the humiliation, set off a chain reaction. One that would involve Hollywood insiders, royal commentators, and even celebrities who were already inside the event. Think about that for a second. Meghan's struggle wasn't just with security. It was with the entire weight of an industry that seemed to be turning its back on her. And in that moment, under the Venetian lights, she realized just how brutal the game of fame can be. Now, let me ask you, was this simply an embarrassing mix-up, or was it something more sinister? A message from Hollywood that Meghan Markle's time in the spotlight is over? Because what happened next, what unfolded after that denial, would prove that this wasn't just another awkward moment. It was the start of a humiliation that would echo louder than any speech, any podcast, or any Netflix special she could ever produce. And the best part? Nobody saw it coming. Venice has always been a place of spectacle, but not like this. That's the line whispered by one journalist who claimed to be on the red carpet that night, and it sets the tone perfectly. Because Venice, unlike any other film festival, carries an aura that feels untouchable. The floating city itself feels like a movie set. Winding canals, Gothic palaces, gondoliers in striped shirts calling out as they paddle beneath centuries-old bridges. It's Europe's dreamscape, where past and present collide in a swirl of art, history, and glamour. And every September, the Venice Film Festival transforms that dreamscape into something even more surreal, the global capital of cinema. Imagine it. A-list stars stepping off private water taxis, gowns flowing in the breeze, paparazzi screaming for attention, the flashbulbs turning the night into starlight. This isn't just a film festival. It's the place where careers are cemented, reputations are reforged, and the Oscars race quietly begins. But amid this carnival of light and elegance, there was a moment of awkwardness, a disturbance so small at first that most thought it couldn't possibly matter. Yet it would snowball into the story that overshadowed films, premieres, and even the festival's winners. And at the center of it all was Meghan Markle. Let's take a step back. Venice has always been about exclusivity. Unlike other festivals, where red carpets are often crowded with influencers, publicists, and minor players, Venice prides itself on being selective. If you're on that carpet, you've earned it, whether through a starring role, a powerful industry connection, or a hand-picked fashion house invitation. There's no stumbling in by accident. Every guest is curated, every face pre-approved. So when Meghan arrived, or allegedly tried to arrive, the tension was already in the air. You could almost feel it, like the hush before a storm. Cameras swung toward her, thinking it was business as usual. But the security guards? They didn't budge. Why is that moment so important? Because Venice is not just a stage, it's a hierarchy. The carpet is sacred. No list, no entry. And Meghan, who once held the most recognizable last name on the planet, allegedly found herself outside that hierarchy. But let's paint the picture vividly. Picture Meghan stepping off a sleek black boat, sunglasses on, hair perfectly styled, draped in a gown tailored to make headlines. The paparazzi, desperate for a shot, push against the barriers. For a second, it feels like her triumphant return. The flashbulbs ignite. The crowd murmurs. It's her. She's here. And then, the silence. The hesitation. A guard leans forward, scanning the list. His lips tighten. A shake of the head. Suddenly, the glamour collapses into confusion. What should have been her cinematic entrance turns into a scene of awkward negotiation. Can you imagine the irony? A duchess, accustomed to doors swinging open, being stopped cold in front of the world. It wasn't just a pause. It was a public line drawn in the sand. Now, this moment wasn't born out of thin air. Meghan's reputation in Hollywood has been on shaky ground for years. Yes, she's been photographed alongside the elite. Yes, she's mingled with producers and directors. But Hollywood has a long memory. They remember the headlines, the controversies, the whispers of diva-like behavior. And in a city like Venice, where image is everything, those whispers echo louder than applause. And here's where it gets interesting. Some insiders claim Meghan fully expected to glide onto that carpet, that she believed her name alone guaranteed entry. That's how it used to work. During her Suits days, doors opened because she was part of the machinery of Hollywood. Later, as a royal, doors opened because she was untouchable. But now, she stood in a strange limbo, no longer a working actress, no longer a working royal, and increasingly, no longer guaranteed a seat at the table. The build-up to this humiliation didn't start in Venice. It started years ago, when Meghan and Harry stepped away from the monarchy. At first, Hollywood embraced them. Netflix threw millions their way. Spotify handed her a podcast platform. Magazines splashed them on covers. But as projects faltered, patience wore thin. Deals dried up. Former allies grew quiet. Suddenly, the invitations weren't flowing as freely. Venice was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be the glamorous stage where she could reset the narrative, where she could remind the world that she wasn't just tabloid fodder, but still belonged in the circles of power and influence. But instead, she met resistance. The symbolism here is almost cinematic. A velvet rope dividing two worlds. Inside, the powerful and the relevant. Outside, the desperate and the fading. Which side was Meghan on that night? That's the question that kept circling in the days that followed. And it wasn't just about her. Because when Meghan stumbles, the world immediately asks, where is Harry? Why isn't he there? Why isn't he protecting her, standing by her side? His absence raised more questions than answers. Did he know she wasn't invited? Did he choose not to attend because he foresaw the embarrassment? Or was this Meghan going solo, determined to prove she could still command attention on her own? Now, let's not forget the audience. Not the fans watching from home, but the actual crowd on the ground. Those moments of hesitation on a red carpet are like blood in the water to paparazzi. Every flash, every angle, every muttered word becomes evidence. Some claimed Meghan's face betrayed her fury. Others said she smiled tightly, trying to hold her composure. But either way, the clipboards didn't lie. Her name wasn't there. The middle of this scene plays out almost like a slow-motion train wreck. Cameras clicking, assistants whispering, publicists gesturing wildly, trying to negotiate. And Meghan? Standing there, caught between defiance and disbelief. That's what makes this story so captivating. Because it isn't just about being denied entry. It's about the symbolism of a woman who once stood at the pinnacle, now facing the harsh reality of a door that would not open. So let me ask you directly, was this Hollywood sending Meghan a message? That her time as the darling of the industry was over? That her controversies had finally outweighed her star power? Or was it something more petty, more mundane? Simply a bureaucratic mistake, a forgotten email, a missed checkmark on a guest list? That's the contradiction of fame. Sometimes the smallest mistakes create the biggest headlines. And sometimes, those mistakes are engineered by people who want to send a message without saying a word. As the scene stretched out, tension rising, the crowd watching, one thing became clear. This was no ordinary mix-up. It was a humiliation playing out in real time, with the entire world as its audience. But here's the twist. Meghan didn't leave. She didn't turn and walk away. She stood her ground. Witnesses say she argued, insisted, even demanded. She wasn't about to let the velvet rope define her. And that's where this story takes a darker, more dramatic turn. Because the words she allegedly exchanged with that guard, the confrontation that followed, would ignite a storm far beyond Venice. But before we dive into that storm, let's pause and consider what this night meant symbolically. Venice isn't just about films. It's about legacy. It's about who gets to be remembered, celebrated, immortalized in images that outlive the moment. Meghan arrived hoping to cement her legacy. Instead, she walked into a trapdoor moment that exposed the fragility of her fame. And this is where the chapter ends, on the edge of that velvet rope, with Meghan locked in a standoff that nobody expected, and with cameras capturing every second. Because what she allegedly said next didn't just embarrass her. It set off a chain of whispers, leaks, and headlines that would follow her all the way back across the Atlantic. But what came next would prove that this wasn't simply about being uninvited. It was about something far more brutal, an entire industry turning its back on her. That was the paradox of this moment. Meghan Markle wasn't denied entry into a palace or a political summit. She was denied entry into a party, a red carpet. Yet in that denial, everything she'd tried to build since stepping away from the royal family seemed to crack. So let's go deeper. Why did this matter so much? Why did being turned away from one glamorous event send shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond? Because it wasn't just about that night in Venice. It was about history, about Meghan's past with red carpets, her complicated relationship with Hollywood, and the sharp contrast between who she used to be and who she is now. Think back to Meghan's early career. She wasn't born into fame. She hustled for it. Commercial auditions, background roles, forgettable cameos. Then came her big break on Suits, where she carved out a space for herself on the television map. And with that role came something even more intoxicating, the red carpets. Those carpets were her ticket into the world she craved. She smiled for cameras. She posed in gowns. She learned the rhythm of celebrity. Back then, she wasn't turned away. She was welcomed. She was, in her own right, Hollywood's rising star. But what happens when the star burns out? When the lights that once followed you start to flicker, and the invitations that once filled your inbox start to dry up? That's the twist here. Meghan knew the red carpet as both a dream and a battlefield. To be embraced by it meant validation. To be denied it meant humiliation. And Venice wasn't just any carpet. It was the one that crowned the elite of the elite. Now, here's the contradiction. Meghan had already transcended Hollywood once. She married into the royal family. She became a duchess. She didn't need the industry anymore, or so it seemed. And yet, years later, here she was, allegedly standing at a velvet rope, demanding entry, desperate for Hollywood to embrace her again. Isn't that ironic? To walk away from a palace only to fight for a place at a red carpet? Let's talk about symbolism. Because in the world of celebrity, every detail is loaded with meaning. The red carpet is more than fabric. It's a signal. If you're on it, you're in the game. If you're not, you're irrelevant. And on that night, Meghan's absence from the list screamed louder than her presence ever could have. But here's the kicker. Rumors began circulating that Meghan had actually planned to make this a triumphant surprise appearance. That she hadn't been formally invited, but she believed showing up would force organizers to let her in. After all, how could they possibly turn away Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, wife of Prince Harry? That's where the clash of worlds becomes fascinating. Because Hollywood doesn't operate on the same rules as royalty. In Hollywood, no matter who you are, you play by the event's rules. And Venice is notorious for enforcing them ruthlessly. No invitation, no badge, no entry, period. So when security shook their heads, they weren't just enforcing protocol. They were enforcing the brutal truth. Meghan wasn't untouchable anymore. Think about that for a second. For years, Meghan was surrounded by security whose job was to ensure she was never embarrassed, never vulnerable. And now, those very figures of authority, the guards at the festival, were the ones enforcing her vulnerability. And the world noticed. Cameras caught the hesitation. Photographers snapped the standoff. Journalists scribbled notes, already crafting headlines. In that moment, Meghan's fury wasn't just personal, it was public. Let's ask the uncomfortable question. Did Meghan overplay her hand? Did she assume her name alone would open doors that, in reality, had quietly closed? The answer depends on who you ask. Some say yes, that Meghan misjudged her relevance. Others argue that she knew exactly what she was doing. That being denied was, in its own way, a win. Because humiliation on the carpet still meant headlines, still meant attention. And in Meghan's world, attention has always been currency. But the contradiction runs deeper. Because Meghan has long claimed she doesn't crave the spotlight, that she fled the monarchy to protect her peace, to escape the cameras, to shield her children from scrutiny. Yet here she was, allegedly inserting herself into one of the most photographed events on the planet. Do you see the irony? The woman who said she wanted privacy was now demanding publicity in its most dramatic form. And here's where the story sharpens. Witnesses claim Meghan didn't stay silent when denied. She pushed back. She insisted. Her voice raised. Her composure cracking. The Duchess, who once commanded royal processions, now allegedly arguing with security guards over her name not being on a list. The visual is almost too surreal. And yet, it happened. Or at least, that's what the witnesses say. Now, let's pivot to the build-up. Because Venice wasn't Meghan's first encounter with rejection. Hollywood has been whispering about her for months. Deals falling apart. Friends distancing themselves. Even Oprah, once her strongest ally, quietly fading from her circle. So by the time she reached that rope in Venice, she wasn't just fighting for entry into a premiere. She was fighting for relevance itself. And the cruel thing about relevance is that you can't demand it. You can't argue your way into it. You either have it, or you don't. Let's make this more personal. Imagine walking into your high school reunion, convinced everyone will remember you as the most important person in the room. You expect the whispers, the awe, the validation. And instead, no one even recognizes you. That's what Venice represented for Meghan. A rude awakening. A reality check. But here's the twist. The humiliation wasn't contained. It spread. By the next morning, whispers of the incident were everywhere. Social media buzzed. Tabloids speculated. Some mocked her. Some pitted her. But either way, they talked about her. And that's where the power lies. Because in the end, Meghan achieved what she always wanted. Attention. But it wasn't the kind she hoped for. The contradictions pile up here. Meghan wanted to prove she was still Hollywood royalty. Instead, she confirmed the opposite. She wanted to show strength. Instead, she revealed fragility. She wanted the night to be her comeback. Instead, it became her cautionary tale. And now comes the most surprising twist of all. Because in the hours after the denial, insiders claim a shocking detail emerged. Meghan may have known, even before arriving, that she wasn't on the list. If that's true, then this wasn't just humiliation, it was a gamble. A calculated risk. Show up uninvited. Bet on your fame to override protocol, and either walk away triumphant or walk away a headline. That's the kind of gamble that defines Meghan Markle's story. Bold, risky, contradictory, and always polarizing. But here's where the stakes rise even higher. Because while Meghan fought for her place on the carpet, other celebrities walked by. Real A-listers, Hollywood icons. And their reactions, whispers, sidelong glances, even subtle smirks, only deepened the humiliation. It wasn't just security turning her away. It was Hollywood itself, symbolically closing the door. And that's why this chapter matters. Because Venice wasn't just a stumble. It was a statement. That Meghan Markle, once untouchable, was now vulnerable. That the carpet she once glided across had turned into a battlefield she couldn't win. But don't think for a second the story ends here. No, this was only the beginning. Because the confrontation at the Velvet Rope triggered a chain reaction. Emails leaked. Insider whispers grew louder. And soon, the world wasn't just asking why Meghan was denied. They were asking what else Hollywood knew that the public didn't. And those whispers? They would lead straight into a revelation so explosive, it would turn the embarrassment of Venice into something far darker. Because the next leak didn't just explain why Meghan was uninvited. It exposed how far her Hollywood downfall had already gone. And no one, not even Meghan herself, was ready for the truth that came next. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? On paper, it sounds almost ridiculous. How could someone who has spent years at the center of global headlines not secure an invitation to one of the most photographed events on the planet. How could a woman once introduced to crowds as Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex, find herself face-to-face with a security guard who didn't budge an inch? To answer that, you need to understand something most people don't. Red carpets aren't as simple as showing up and strutting down the velvet. They're fortresses, carefully choreographed machines. And every machine has rules. Rules that Meghan allegedly broke the moment she tried to step past that rope. Let's pull back the curtain. When a celebrity is invited to an event like the Venice Film Festival, the process starts weeks, sometimes months, in advance. There are official invitations, confirmation emails, security clearances, and in many cases, an assigned arrival time. Why? Because chaos is the enemy of prestige. Organizers want everything to run like clockwork. Who steps out of which car, at what angle, at what time, into which spotlight. Every red carpet is a script, and only the chosen get lines. So when Meghan showed up without that script, it was like an actor crashing a scene she hadn't been cast in. The security guards weren't just being rude. They were following protocol. If her name wasn't on that iPad, if her badge wasn't scanned, she was, in their eyes, no different from the tourists standing behind the barricades. And that's the irony. Meghan, who once traveled with royal protection officers tasked with shielding her from the world, was now on the outside looking in. The rules that used to bend for her no longer did. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been to a nightclub where the bouncer holds the power of God himself? You're dressed to the nines. You've rehearsed your best smile. And then, with one glance at his list, your fate is sealed. That's what this moment was, magnified 100 times over by paparazzi lenses and global scrutiny. Now, let's lean into the contradiction. Meghan has always presented herself as someone who understands the inner workings of celebrity. She's not naive. She knows how red carpets function. She's played this game before, which makes the question even sharper. Why was she there if she wasn't officially cleared? Here's where the theories explode. Some insiders believe it was a genuine mix-up, that her team miscommunicated with organizers, or that paperwork was lost in the shuffle. Others believe it was arrogance, that Meghan assumed her status guaranteed her entry, regardless of formalities. And then there's the darker theory, that she knew she wasn't invited but showed up anyway, betting on the chaos of cameras and flashing bulbs to force organizers' hands. Would Hollywood really risk the optics of turning away Meghan Markle on live cameras? That was the gamble. But gambles don't always pay off. And this is where the humiliation deepens. Because reports claim the security guard didn't even flinch. He didn't care about titles. He didn't care about headlines. He only cared about the list, and Meghan's name wasn't there. Think about how that must have felt. For years, Meghan lived in a world where her very presence opened doors. Where event organizers bent schedules around her, where PR managers scrambled to accommodate her. And now, she was standing in front of a guard who looked at her with the same indifference he'd give a stranger. That's not just rejection. That's erasure. And the witnesses noticed. One journalist claimed you could see Meghan's posture shift in real time, from confidence to disbelief to fury. Another described how her assistants scrambled, making frantic calls, their faces pale under the flashbulbs. And the crowd? The crowd leaned in like theatergoers waiting for the climax of a play. Here's the emotional spike. Meghan didn't just face a closed door. She faced it in front of an audience. A red carpet is designed for triumph, for applause, for perfection frozen in photographs. To be stopped at one is like tripping at your own wedding. There's no graceful recovery. The image is burned forever. But here's where it gets even more ironic. Meghan wasn't always denied access. In fact, just a few years ago, she was the one organizers fought over. Every outlet wanted her. Every camera turned to her. When she and Harry first appeared at royal events, they were treated like Hollywood's answer to a fairy tale. That was the peak. And now, just a handful of years later, she was facing the valley. Isn't it fascinating how quickly the pendulum swings? One minute you're the star everyone wants to book. The next, you're the outsider begging for a line on the guest list. But here's where the contradiction sharpens. Meghan wasn't just any outsider. She was a duchess. She was still married to a prince. She was still a name that could command front pages. And yet, none of that mattered to the man with the clipboard. In his world, there were only two categories, on the list or not. And Meghan? She wasn't. So what happened next? Reports suggest she protested. that she raised her voice, that she insisted there must be some mistake. Witnesses claim her words cut through the hum of the crowd, that she demanded recognition, that she invoked her name as if it carried weight. But the guard stood firm. No entry. That single phrase, repeated quietly but firmly, became the line of the night. No entry. And here's where we circle back to the logistics. Because while Meghan argued at the gate, other stars were walking past her, smiling, posing, soaking in the applause. The machine moved on. The script played out. And Meghan? She was no longer part of it. That's the brutal truth of Hollywood. The spotlight doesn't wait for you. It moves on without mercy. So let's ask the hard question. Was this Meghan's rock-bottom moment? Or was it just another bump on a long road of rejection? Because in the days that followed, whispers began to spread. Whispers that this wasn't a mistake at all, that her exclusion had been deliberate, that Hollywood insiders were quietly closing ranks, drawing invisible lines, and Meghan found herself on the wrong side. If that's true, then Venice wasn't just a rejection. It was a warning. And if you think that's dramatic, wait until you hear what the witnesses claim Meghan said in her final attempt to push past that rope. Because it wasn't just about her name. It wasn't just about her presence. It was about her anger, and how that anger spilled into words that shocked even those who had seen it all before. Words that turned a quiet standoff into the most talked-about scandal of the festival. Because when the Duchess finally snapped, she didn't just lose the moment. She lit the fuse for everything that would come after. And what she said next left even the guards stunned. But what came after her words? That was the beginning of the real spectacle, and the humiliation was about to go global. That was the question hanging in the Venetian air as Meghan Markle's composure allegedly cracked. Up until that moment, she had played the role, poised, polished, the Duchess trying to glide into an event she clearly believed she belonged at. But then came the guards' final no entry. And with that, the tension exploded. Witnesses claim Meghan's voice cut sharp across the red carpet chaos. It wasn't the kind of whisper you might brush off. It was the kind of tone that commands attention. Those nearby stopped mid-sentence. Even the photographers, used to shouting for the perfect angle, paused. And here's the contradiction that makes this scene unforgettable. Meghan has long styled herself as calm, dignified, and in control, especially when she knows the cameras are rolling. But this time, she allegedly snapped. Words spilled out, accusations, demands, disbelief. Eyewitnesses claim she insisted she was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex. She reportedly argued that the list was wrong, that the mistake was theirs, not hers. Now, let's pause for a second. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? How often have we seen stories about celebrities invoking their names, insisting rules don't apply to them? The irony here is razor sharp. Meghan, who spent years telling the world she wanted to escape the spotlight, was now allegedly demanding the spotlight by force. Have you ever seen someone who's used to doors opening suddenly face a closed one? It's not just awkward, it's devastating. And for Meghan, the devastation wasn't private. It was public, magnified by dozens of camera lenses. The bystanders noticed. Journalists scribbled furiously. One whispered to another. This is the story of the night. Think about that. In a festival filled with Oscar hopefuls and Hollywood royalty, Meghan's standoff with a security guard became the headline. The crowd reaction added fuel to the fire. At first, there was confusion. Was this really happening? Then came the murmurs. Some laughed under their breath. Others shook their heads. And still others reached for their phones, recording the chaos in shaky vertical videos destined to go viral within minutes. The humiliation was no longer theoretical. It was documented, and Meghan knew it. That's what stung the most. Reports claim her face flushed, her smile tightened, her gestures became sharper. She wasn't just arguing with a guard anymore. She was fighting against the inevitability of becoming a meme, a punchline, a trending hashtag. Let's put ourselves in her shoes for a second. Imagine being surrounded by flashing bulbs, knowing every angle is being captured, and realizing the narrative is slipping from your control. What do? Do you walk away gracefully, hoping the moment will be forgotten? Or do you double down, demanding respect, even if it means fanning the flames? Meghan doubled down, and that's when the irony reached its peak. Because while she was locked in this battle, actual A-listers strolled by, smiling, waving, commanding the kind of effortless attention she once did. Imagine standing still, stuck in an argument, while the parade of relevance marches right past you. That's what Meghan faced. The symbolism is brutal. Meghan wasn't just denied entry. She was sidelined while others took her place. Now, here's where the contradictions sharpen. Meghan often speaks about dignity, about rising above negativity, about refusing to be defined by tabloids. But this moment, it wasn't dignified. It wasn't controlled. It was raw, emotional, messy. And messy is exactly what Hollywood doesn't forgive. And yet, this is what makes the scene so captivating. Because for the first time, the mask slipped. The carefully curated image of the Duchess cracked. We saw desperation, not detachment. Fury, not finesse. And that makes the story more human, more dramatic, and more damaging. So what exactly did she say? Witnesses disagree on the exact wording. Some claim she shouted, "Do you know who I am?" Others say she demanded, "I was invited, check again." A few insist she snapped at her own team, accusing them of botching her entry. The details blur, but the impact? Crystal clear. Meghan Markle was arguing her way into relevance, and the world was watching. And this is where the humiliation transformed into something bigger. Because once those words hit social media, they became ammunition. For critics, it confirmed every accusation of entitlement. For supporters, it was a painful sign that Meghan was being unfairly humiliated. Either way, the moment spiraled out of her control. Ask yourself, how many times in history have we seen one viral clip undo years of image building? It doesn't take much. Just a few seconds of footage, taken out of context or not, and suddenly the narrative shifts. Meghan's Venice moment had all the makings of that kind of clip. And here's the twist that makes it even worse. While Meghan was arguing with security, some insiders claim event organizers inside were already aware she wasn't on the list. In fact, rumors suggest her exclusion may have been deliberate, that she wasn't just forgotten, she was intentionally sidelined. If that's true, then this wasn't just an embarrassing moment. It was a calculated rejection, a way for Hollywood to send a message. Meghan Markle doesn't call the shots here. And that's where the emotional beat deepens. Because for Meghan, this wasn't just about one carpet. It was about the larger war she's been waging since stepping away from the royal family. The fight to stay relevant, to command attention, to prove she still belongs at the center of the story. Venice wasn't supposed to be her humiliation. It was supposed to be her triumph. But the narrative flipped. The middle of this chapter builds on that contradiction. Think about the optics. Meghan, once chased by photographers, now cornered by them. Once celebrated as the new Diana, now mocked as the outsider trying too hard. The fairy tale had twisted into farce, and the cameras caught it all. And the whispers only grew. Backstage chatter turned into headlines. Headlines turned into think pieces. Think pieces turned into global debate. Was Meghan a victim of Hollywood cruelty, or the architect of her own downfall? But here's where the real sting came. Because even as Meghan argued at the rope, even as the crowd watched, the photographers did what they always do. They clicked. They captured. They froze her worst moment in still images that would live far longer than the incident itself. And those photos? They told a story words could never undo. Let's not pretend this was just another celebrity mishap. This was a duchess, a global name, being denied in front of the world. That's a headline you can't erase. That's an image you can't spin. So where does this leave Meghan? Was she humiliated? Yes. Was she mocked? Absolutely. But was she forgotten? No. And that's the contradiction at the heart of her story. Even in rejection, she dominates the conversation. Even in humiliation, she commands the spotlight. But here's the kicker. The humiliation didn't end at the carpet. In fact, it was just beginning. Because the very next day, new whispers began to surface. Whispers of what insiders really thought of Meghan. Whispers of why she hadn't been invited in the first place. And those whispers? They weren't kind. They painted a picture not just of one night gone wrong, but of an entire industry quietly turning its back. And the first glimpse of that betrayal came not from the guards, not from the crowd, but from the media who feasted on her humiliation like sharks circling blood in the water. Because when the headlines hit, they didn't ask whether Meghan had been treated unfairly. They asked whether she even deserved to be there in the first place. And that's when Meghan's humiliation turned from a moment into a movement, one that could haunt her for years to come. But the cruelest part? The cameras caught something else too. something Meghan herself may not have realized in the heat of the moment. A detail that, once spotted, made the humiliation even sharper, even more unforgettable. And that detail would explode online within hours. And when that detail was leaked, the story shifted from embarrassment to betrayal. Because Venice wasn't just the night Meghan was denied. It was the night Hollywood allegedly confirmed what insiders had whispered all along, that she wasn't welcome anymore. And the proof? It was in those very images. But what exactly did the cameras capture that sparked those whispers? What detail turned a public humiliation into an industry-wide scandal? That's the cliffhanger. Because what came next wasn't just about Meghan at a velvet rope. It was about the brutal truth of how Hollywood really sees her. And no one, least of all Meghan, was prepared for that revelation. What's more brutal than being denied entry? Being denied entry while the entire world watches, and then realizing the people inside don't even want you there. That was the haunting truth behind Meghan Markle's Venice humiliation. Because the detail the cameras caught. The sideways glances, the smirks, the subtle shrugs of celebrities breezing past her, told a story that words alone couldn't capture. This wasn't just one guard saying no. This was Hollywood itself sending a message. And the message was clear. Meghan Markle was no longer welcome. Think about that for a second. For years, Meghan positioned herself as someone who could straddle two worlds, royalty and Hollywood. She was supposed to be the woman who had it all, a prince on one arm and a career comeback on the other. But in Venice, the mask slipped. The fairy tale cracked. The cameras didn't just capture her frustration. They captured her exile. Do you see the contradiction? Meghan thought her name alone carried weight. She thought the cameras turning toward her would pressure the organizers, force them to relent, open the gates. But the cameras didn't save her. They betrayed her. They froze her humiliation into history. And here's the emotional gut punch. Inside that theater, stars were laughing, clinking champagne glasses, strutting under the lights. Meanwhile, outside, Meghan stood in the shadows of flashbulbs, arguing with a guard who wouldn't bend. The distance between her and them wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. She was on the wrong side of the rope and the wrong side of Hollywood. Now let's dive into the reaction. Because once those photos hit the press, the narrative took on a life of its own. Headlines didn't just say Meghan was denied entry. They asked why. And that's where the whispers began to solidify into something darker. Whispers that event organizers had been warned. Whispers that sponsors didn't want her associated with the night. Whispers that her name, once a ticket to prestige, had become a liability. And here's where the contradiction deepens. Meghan has always insisted she walked away from the royal family on her own terms. That she wasn't cast out. She chose freedom. But the optics of Venice flipped that narrative on its head. She wasn't the one walking away anymore. She was the one being turned away. Have you ever felt that sting? When you go somewhere convinced you belong, only to discover you don't. It's one thing to be excluded when you never expected to be included. It's another to be denied when you believed the space was yours by right. That's why Venice cut so deep. It wasn't just rejection. It was rejection magnified by expectation. But let's go back to that detail the cameras caught. Because the real scandal wasn't Meghan's anger. It was the reactions of the people inside. Insiders claim the footage showed A-listers sneaking amused glances as they walked by. One actor, caught mid-smirk, seemed to mutter something to his date. Another starlet, perfectly dressed, gave a look that said everything without saying a word. She doesn't belong here. Those micro-reactions spoke volumes. They told the world Meghan wasn't being denied by accident. She was being denied by design. And the internet, as always, amplified it. Clips of celebrities glancing at Meghan went viral. Some edited them into montages with mocking captions. Others slowed them down, adding dramatic music. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a spectacle, one that spread far faster than any film premiere happening that night. The irony? Meghan wasn't even supposed to be the story. But by being denied, she became the only story. And Hollywood, brutal as it is, thrives on that kind of downfall. Here's where the emotional beat twists the knife. Meghan came to Venice to prove herself. To remind the world she still had clout, glamour, and access. Instead, she reminded the world how fragile all of that really was. And here's the part no one saw coming. By the next morning, industry insiders began leaking whispers to the press. quiet confirmations that Meghan wasn't on the list by mistake. She wasn't invited at all. And worse, she may have been actively excluded. Why? Because according to those whispers, sponsors and organizers feared she would overshadow the event. Not by brilliance, not by glamour, but by controversy. That's the paradox of Meghan Markle. She's famous enough to command attention, but too controversial to be embraced. She draws headlines, but not the kind the Venice Film Festival wants. Let me ask you this. What's more painful, to be forgotten, or to be remembered for the wrong reasons? For Meghan, Venice proved she was unforgettable, but for all the wrong reasons. And that brings us to the heart of this chapter, the viral storm. Social media, as it always does, turned the humiliation into content. Memes spread like wildfire. Some mocked her expressions. Others compared her to party crashers. Still others used the clip as proof of her alleged arrogance. But here's the twist. Not everyone mocked her. Some sympathized. Some saw her as the victim of elitism, of Hollywood cruelty, of a machine that eats people alive and spits them out when they're no longer useful. And in that sympathy, a new narrative emerged. Maybe Meghan wasn't the villain. Maybe she was the scapegoat. That contradiction kept the story alive. Was she the entitled duchess demanding attention, or the unfairly humiliated outsider? The answer depended on who you asked. But either way, the world kept asking. And for Meghan, that might have been the only silver lining. Attention is still attention. Relevance is still relevance. Even if it comes in the form of memes and mockery, it means the spotlight hasn't moved on completely. But here's where the emotional beat lands hardest. Meghan didn't want that kind of relevance. She wanted admiration, not ridicule. Respect, not pity. She wanted to walk into Venice as a star reborn. Instead, she left as a cautionary tale. And this is where the industry backlash began. Because the whispers didn't stop at Venice. They spread. Other festivals, other organizers, other insiders began to question. If Meghan could cause this much chaos at Venice, do we want her at our event? If her presence guarantees controversy, is she worth the risk? Venice wasn't just one night. It was the start of a domino effect. And Meghan knew it. That's why, according to insiders, her fury after leaving the event wasn't just about being denied. It was about realizing the damage would follow her far beyond Venice. But here's the cliffhanger. Because what happened next wasn't just whispers, wasn't just speculation. It was a leak. A leaked email, allegedly from someone connected to the festival, that spelled out exactly why Meghan wasn't welcome. And that leak? It didn't just confirm her worst fears. It exposed something far darker about her standing in Hollywood. Because the rejection wasn't random. It was calculated. And when the world read those words, the humiliation of Venice turned into a scandal Meghan couldn't spin away. What could be more humiliating than being stopped at the rope, finding out in black and white why you weren't welcome in the first place? That's what insiders claim happened in the days after Meghan Markle's disastrous appearance at the Venice Film Festival. The whispers had already begun. The speculation was running wild. But then came the leak, an alleged email that stripped away all doubt and exposed exactly how Hollywood saw her. The email was short, brutal, and devastating. According to those who claim to have seen it, the message was sent between festival organizers and sponsors in the weeks leading up to the premiere. The wording was cold, professional, but unmistakable in its meaning. Meghan Markle was not to be added to the guest list. The reason? Potential to overshadow the event with controversy. Let that sink in. Not because she wasn't famous enough. Not because she wasn't relevant. But because her very presence was seen as a threat. A risk. A distraction from the stars who were actually supposed to be celebrated that night. Do you see the irony? Meghan had spent years trying to carve out a new identity in Hollywood, trying to prove she was more than just the Duchess who walked away. But in Venice, the industry confirmed the opposite. They didn't see her as an asset. They saw her as baggage. And here's the emotional gut punch. Imagine reading that. Imagine finding out that the doors weren't closed by accident, but on purpose. That you weren't forgotten. You were rejected. That's a pain sharper than any tabloid headline. Now, let's talk about the contradiction. Meghan has often claimed she was silenced by the royal family, shut out from shaping her own story. But Venice proved she wasn't silenced by the royals anymore. She was silenced by Hollywood itself. The very industry she turned to for freedom was now the one shutting her out. How's that for irony? The leak, of course, spread like wildfire. Screenshots circulated online. Some questioned its authenticity. Others swore it was real. But the damage was done. The narrative had crystallized. Meghan wasn't uninvited by mistake. She was uninvited by design. And that revelation sent shockwaves. Because if Venice didn't want her, who else wouldn't? If her name was toxic enough to keep off one of the biggest guest lists in the world, how many other lists was she quietly being cut from? Here's the twist. The leak didn't just hurt Meghan. It embarrassed her allies too. Fashion houses that had dressed her suddenly fell silent. PR teams that once courted her backed away. Nobody wanted to be associated with the kind of star who got excluded so openly. It was the Hollywood equivalent of being ghosted. And the cruelest part? Meghan wasn't even inside the room to defend herself. While the stars celebrated, drank champagne, and posed for photos, Meghan's reputation was being dismantled in real time outside the velvet rope and across the internet. But here's where the contradictions deepen. Some argue the exclusion wasn't just about Meghan's controversies. It was about control. Venice is fiercely protective of its image. It thrives on prestige, on carefully curated appearances. Meghan's presence, unpredictable and polarizing, threatened that balance. She wasn't excluded because she wasn't glamorous enough. She was excluded because she was too big a story. Think about that. She was denied not because she was irrelevant, but because she was too relevant in the wrong way. That paradox made the rejection sting even more. And let's not forget the human element. Meghan has always portrayed herself as someone who battles against powerful institutions. The royal family, the British press, and now Hollywood. The Venice leak played directly into that narrative, confirming her worst fear, that the institutions she depended on would eventually turn against her. So where does Harry fit into this? His absence loomed larger after the leak. Critics asked, did he know she wasn't invited? Did he stay away to avoid being caught in the humiliation? Supporters asked, why wasn't he there to stand by her, to shield her from the blow? Either way, Harry's silence became its own scandal, and the fallout grew. Commentators dissected every angle. Some saw it as karma, Meghan reaping the consequences of years of alleged manipulation. Others saw it as cruelty, Hollywood punishing a woman who dared to step outside the system. But no matter which side you believed, one truth was undeniable. Meghan was the headline, and not for the reasons she wanted. Now let's dive into the emotional core. Because humiliation isn't just about what happens in public. It's about what lingers in private. Imagine Meghan back in her hotel suite that night. The gown crumpled on the floor. The phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. Her team whispering apologies, excuses, maybe even denials. And on her screen, the emails spreading like wildfire. That's the moment humiliation turns into despair. And yet, here's the contradiction again. Humiliation also turns into attention. Meghan had been excluded, but the exclusion made her the most talked about figure of the festival. She was denied the red carpet, but she owned the headlines. She was mocked online, but she was still at the center of the global conversation. So let me ask you, is that a loss or is that a win? Because in the twisted world of celebrity, sometimes rejection burns brighter than acceptance. Sometimes being denied creates more buzz than being welcomed. And Meghan knows that better than anyone. But here's the problem. Buzz fades, headlines shift, and what remains is the damage. The quiet phone calls not returned, the invitations that never arrive, the fashion houses that politely decline. That's the long-term cost of humiliation. And Meghan's Venice scandal was just the beginning. Because the leaked email sparked something even more dangerous. Open speculation about whether Meghan had been blacklisted by Hollywood altogether. That's the cliffhanger. Because if the Venice leak was real, if she was deliberately excluded to avoid controversy, then it wasn't just one night of humiliation. It was the start of something far more devastating. The question was no longer, why wasn't Meghan on the list? The question was, is Meghan Markle being erased from Hollywood itself? What's worse than being humiliated once? Realizing the humiliation isn't isolated, it's part of a bigger pattern. That's what the whispers around Meghan Markle's Venice humiliation began to reveal. This wasn't just one embarrassing night at one glamorous event. No, insiders claimed it was the symptom of something far more sinister. A quiet decision, an unspoken consensus, a blacklist. Yes, you heard that right. The word no celebrity ever wants to hear. Blacklist. But could it really be true? Could Meghan Markle, once a darling of both Hollywood and royalty, really have been pushed onto the industry's invisible do not invite list? Let's break this down. The leaked email from Venice was the spark. It suggested she wasn't forgotten, she was deliberately excluded. And as journalists dug deeper, more whispers began to surface. Reports of Meghan's name mysteriously missing from other guest lists. Rumors of fashion houses pulling back from offering her gowns. Stories of PR agencies privately advising clients to avoid being photographed with her. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. And here's the contradiction. Meghan was still one of the most famous women on the planet. Her face guaranteed clicks, her name guaranteed headlines. In theory, Hollywood should have been clamoring for her. But the whispers suggested the opposite. That her notoriety was no longer an asset, it was a liability. How's that for irony? The same attention that once made her valuable was now the very thing making her untouchable. Now, let's dive into the emotional gut punch. Imagine living with the knowledge that your fame doesn't open doors anymore, it closes them. That the spotlight you chased now repels the very people you wanted to impress. That instead of being the main event, you've become the distraction everyone wants to avoid. That's what Meghan was facing, according to insiders. And the whispers got darker. Some claimed Netflix executives were quietly frustrated with her performance. Others suggested former allies in Hollywood, who once invited her into their homes and inner circles, had grown distant. Not because she wasn't relevant, but because she was too relevant in the wrong way. Think about that paradox. Meghan had built her brand on being outspoken, controversial, headline-grabbing. But Hollywood, for all its drama, craves control. It loves stars who shine predictably, not those who burn the whole stage down. Meghan was no longer predictable. She was volatile, and that volatility meant risk. So the whispers grew into a question. Had Hollywood decided Meghan wasn't worth the risk anymore? Let's not forget the timing. Venice came after a string of blows. The canceled Spotify deal, the underwhelming Netflix projects, the endless tabloid wars. Meghan wasn't arriving at Venice as the rising star. She was arriving as someone already battling to prove her relevance. And Venice didn't just reject her. It exposed her. The emotional sting of that moment was amplified by what followed. Because once the idea of a blacklist surfaced, every snub, every absence, every silence was reinterpreted. Meghan wasn't just missing from events. She was being erased. Here's a chilling example. A fashion insider whispered that one luxury brand, once eager to dress Meghan, had quietly told stylists not to pitch her anymore. Why? Because they feared the association would lead to backlash. Meghan's name, they said, sparked too much noise. Too much noise. Let that phrase sink in. Because in Hollywood, noise is usually the goal. Buzz is everything. But in Meghan's case, the buzz had turned toxic. The noise wasn't about her talent, her style, her presence. It was about her controversies, her feuds, her missteps. So here's the contradiction. Meghan was still famous enough to dominate headlines. But she was no longer the kind of famous that Hollywood valued. She had crossed that invisible line where fame becomes infamy. Have you ever seen someone go from being the guest of honor to being the guest no one wants to acknowledge? That's what the whispers painted Meghan as. And the speculation snowballed. Commentators began asking outright, was Meghan blacklisted? Was Venice the first proof? Or was it simply the most public symptom of a quiet industry-wide rejection? Now, let's talk about Harry. Because his absence became even more glaring in this context. If Meghan was really being excluded, why wasn't Harry fighting for her? Why wasn't he by her side, demanding respect, forcing the issue? The silence spoke volumes. Some argued Harry was distancing himself, protecting his own reputation. Others claimed he was simply blindsided, caught between loyalty to Meghan and awareness of how damaging the optics had become. Either way, the image was brutal. Meghan alone, denied at the rope, while Harry was nowhere in sight. And that's where the emotional beat cuts deepest. Because the narrative of Meghan and Harry has always been one of unity. Two against the world. But in Venice, it looked like one against the world and losing. The humiliation turned into symbolism. Meghan wasn't just denied at a red carpet. She was denied by Hollywood itself. She wasn't just locked out of a theater. She was locked out of the industry she thought would embrace her after she walked away from the royals. That's the tragedy of Venice. It wasn't just one night of rejection. It was the embodiment of a larger truth. Meghan was running out of stages. But here's where the twist comes in. Because some insiders whispered that Meghan was